this interim government has a very difficult job on its hands. I mean, there are massive challenges at play, and the reforms process will not be easy.
What type of assistance Washington may offer for Bangladesh in terms of reforms, especially in governance and politics and other areas?
The main focus, the main priority for those engagements is to convey Indian concerns, security concerns, plight of the Hindu community in Bangladesh, that type of thing.
Michael Kugelman is director at the South Asian Institute of Wilson Center. It's a Washington-based think tank. We'll talk about Bangladesh-US relationship and its future.
Very welcome to you, Michael, to Star Connects.
Thank you. Good to be here with you.
So my first question to you is that you know that there's a lot of change in Bangladesh politics, and it's also a change in terms of its relationship with foreign countries. If not the foreign policy, but there are differences, changes in degrees of relationship, and so does with the US. So what do you see? How do you see the change? What is really going to happen? The relationship between US and Bangladesh.
Right. So, I think that what we're seeing happen with the U.S.-Bangladesh relationship in recent weeks has been very encouraging. It's very clear that for the time being, at least with the current administration, which will not be in office much longer, has indicated that it is committed to working with Bangladesh to strengthen its economy and to provide development assistance, and also to lend support on the all-important reforms process. And that was a very clear message that was sent by the senior U.S. delegation that visited Dhaka some days ago. And I think it's a welcome thing to see public messaging and rhetoric coming from the U.S. and also from Bangladesh, for that matter, being positive. There's no toxicity, right? And what we had seen in recent years is that the relationship was not in a bad state, but it tended to be eclipsed by tensions and controversy over the issue of the U.S. commenting on rights and democracy in Bangladesh. So right now, the messaging is very simple and very clear. Coming from Washington, that is that, we're here to help. We want to help. We want to see the country succeed, move forward, stabilize, and that we're here to help. And I think that certainly Dr. Yunus is a very important factor in that regard. As we all know, he's very well regarded in Washington. He's very well known, and there's a very genuine commitment on the part of the current administration to work with him. And I think that's important. But as you well know, depending on the outcome of the U.S. election, I think that the nature of the U.S.-Bangladesh relationship could change considerably, specifically if Donald Trump were to return to the presidency.
So, no, you pointed out a very important thing. So what kind of change you see if there is a change in administration following the US elections?
The focus of the relationship right now seems to be on U.S. support for Bangladesh's stabilization. USAID just concluded a new agreement with Bangladesh to provide development assistance. Current administration officials have said that they're looking forward to working with Bangladesh and helping support its reforms. That type of relationship, or that type of emphasis on a relationship, I don't think would be of particular interest to a President Trump, who I think, as you know, or based on his track record as president previously, he sees U.S. relations with other countries, including close partners, as relatively transactional. And so in that regard, I don't necessarily think that he would be interested in framing the relationship around the U.S. helping rebuild Bangladesh, so to speak, or stabilize it. I think that Donald Trump, if he were to return to the presidency, his administration would be perfectly comfortable with a workable, friendly relationship with Bangladesh. But I do think that it would focus, the lens would be a bit more narrow, in the sense that it would be focused on great power competition and working with Bangladesh to ensure that it doesn't become too dependent on China and to get too close to China. I do think that the one level of continuity, one point of continuity between a Biden administration and a Trump administration would be a focus on the commercial relationship. The president, Donald Trump is someone who wants, who's committed to bilateral commercial relationship so long as it's beneficial for U.S. interests. And I think one could argue that given that the U.S. is a top destination for Bangladesh exports, that's something that he would want to continue. So I don't want to overstate the differences that we might see in a U.S.-Bangladesh relationship if Trump were to return. But I do think that this new current, very sharp focus on assistance, U.S. focus on reforms, support, that type of thing, that's what I imagine changing just a bit. I think that Trump may move away from that.
So you talked about commerce, trade. What about the current scenario? I mean, like, wouldn't the trade and commerce and economic relationship grow when the Biden administration is there?
Well, it has. I mean, if you look at the nature of U.S. Bangladesh trade relations, I've said this many times. It's easy to forget that since this relationship became, there was so much of a fixation on the values component of the relationship, and the U.S. being so publicly focused and critical of rights and democracy. I think that many seem to think the relationship was in a terrible state and was falling apart. But no, you had a lot of pathways that were showing significant levels of success, and one of them has been the trade relationship, the commercial relationship. But I mean, certainly it could stand to get better. And as you know, the U.S. has suspended GSP privileges for Bangladesh for many years, going back to the Obama administration. So that's obviously something that, at least with the current administration, I think there's a view hoping that labor rights conditions improve in Bangladesh. So there might be an opportunity to reinstate GSP privileges. But I think at this point, and again, we're talking about only a few more weeks, a few more months that the current administration will be in office. I think that there's certainly an interest in maintaining trade. I mean, there's a U.S.-Bangladesh Business Council that has been very effective, I think, at conveying the goals and the desires of the U.S. business community to invest in trade with Bangladesh. But I think that the main focus for this current administration will be more on working with Bangladesh to stabilize the country economically, provide technical assistance for reforms, and so on.
So what type of assistance Washington may offer for Bangladesh in terms of reforms, especially in governance and politics and other areas?
I mean, I think that there hasn't been much that's been indicated publicly about what type of assistance would be entailed. But I assume that we're talking about various forms of technical assistance. I would also note that the U.S. government, the administration, appears very keen to support the idea of the Bangladeshi diaspora community in the U.S. Making its own contributions to help Bangladesh with the reforms process. And as you know, the Bangladeshi diaspora in the United States is nowhere near as large as the Indian diaspora or a number of other Asian diasporas, but it's sizable. It's a relatively prosperous one. And I think that there's a hope that Bangladeshi Americans can, either through their own expertise or the resources that they can provide, can play a role in pushing Bangladesh forward.
Michael, let me come to a different perspective, which is that the Awami League government and India had a very good relationship, and there were some controversies. India meddling in Bangladesh's affairs, or India accusing Washington DC meddling in Bangladesh's affairs. So where does the relationship stand now, given that former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is sheltered in India?
Right. I mean, it's at a very shaky point for sure. I mean, as you said, for so long, India had looked at Sheikh Hasina really as India's closest friend, closest ally in all of the region and all of South Asia. I mean, clearly there is a desire on the part of India to figure out how to make this relationship work. All right. I mean, there have been some engagements. Jaishankar met with the Bangladesh Foreign Affairs Advisor in New York. And there have been engagements between the Indian High Commissioner and several notable political figures, including at least one top leader of the BNP. So clearly there's a desire to at least talk through things and figure out how to move forward. But I imagine that from the Indian side, the main focus, the main priority for those engagements is to convey Indian concerns, security concerns, plight of the Hindu community in Bangladesh, that type of thing.
Hmm.
But I think that given the Sheikh Hasina factor it looms large for sure, and I could understand that from Bangladesh, the Bangladesh government's perspective, so long as Hasina remains in India, it's going to be really be difficult to move forward. But I don't think that India's desire to figure out a way to move the relationship forward with Bangladesh is strong enough that it would be willing to send her back to Bangladesh if there were a formal extradition request. I don't think that India will do that. I don't think that it would send her back. I suspect
Hmm.
that there's probably a process in play to try to see about her being relocated to a third country. And I think India would hope that
Okay.
in due course that could happen, because that would remove a notable tension point in the relationship. But let me end with this, and to be very candid, my sense is that the very simple reality of Jamaat Islami being back on the scene politically, so to speak, the mere fact that it's been unbanned from politics and it's now in a position to be a part of politics, that in of itself, I think, is enough to give India pause about trying to rebuild its relationship with Bangladesh. But bottom line is both countries need each other. I mean, given trade interests,
Right.
given security interests, I
Hmm.
don't think either country could afford to just distance themselves from the other. It just doesn't make sense. I think that we'll see pragmatism set in due course. You will see some type of relationship. It'll just take time for India to figure out how it wants to go about that.
Okay. And earlier we talked about you, and you told me that Washington looks at Bangladesh, or Washington's foreign policy with Dhaka is its target is the China. So something like that. So that China is not very strong in this region, and also US's Indo-Pacific policy, that's very important, and Bangladesh is a very key country under this strategy. So now, as the Dhaka-Washington tie gets stronger, what's the future? How it looks like?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say because I think that this interim government in Bangladesh, so long as it's in power, it is not going to be as hesitant to move very close to China as the Sheikh Hasina government was, because I think the Sheikh Hasina government was very careful. It certainly moved relations forward with China in a big way. That's very clear. But I think that there were things that it wouldn't do for fear of upsetting India. I don't think that's the case with this interim government now. So theoretically, there's nothing stopping Bangladesh, so to speak, from moving even closer to China. And how the U.S. tries to navigate that challenge will be that's a key thing. Now, indeed, I mean, the Bangladesh is clearly committed to working closely with the United States, and I think that Dr. Yunus and his government would not want to do anything geopolitically, particularly with China, that could cause concern in Washington. But then again, Beijing continues to be a very important partner and interlocutor for Bangladesh, regardless of the government that's in power, because China provides certain levels of assistance, particularly infrastructure assistance, in ways that other countries cannot do as quickly and on the scale that China can. So it's going to be a balancing game, and I think that we're going to see a continuation of a long-standing policy in Bangladesh of essentially hedging and trying to manage relations, balance ties with all of the key players and powers, China,
Mhm.
the United
Mhm.
States, Russia, for that matter, and India as well. But here I'll say something that I think is important to highlight. We hear so much about how the US and India don't see eye to eye in Bangladesh because of their views of this new government, which is true. But at the end of the day, there's still a very strong strategic convergence between the US and India when it comes to Bangladesh, because both
Right.
share a strong interest in this interim government not moving so close to China that it makes things very difficult for both New Delhi and Washington.
Michael, so in South Asia, this region is quite, fragmented. The SARC has not been really working, and the Professor Yunus's interim government, he himself has said several times that he wants SARC to be revitalized. As a South Asian expert, do you think that that's viable, given the fact that India Pakistan rivalry is very strong?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting, isn't it? Because as I understand it, the idea of SARC can in part be attributed to a Bangladeshi political figure years ago,
Yeah.
um, and I think the context is also important. That Dr. Yunus made his comment about wanting to revitalize SARC after he had a meeting with the Pakistani Prime Minister, who had
Right.
also indicated a
Right.
desire in making it work. No, I think to be very honest, SARC is effectively dead unless it were to reform in a big way. And what I mean by that is that SARC functions based on consensus and unanimity, meaning that all of the members of SARC need to agree before anything meaningful can be done, before any decision can be made. And indeed, as you note, given the realities of India-Pakistan relations, they're both members. That relationship is paralyzed. They oftentimes don't agree on things. So that makes it tough. And it's a real shame because SARC, I think, could play a very important, even essential role in South Asian affairs now, because you have so many emerging, intensifying threats that are
Mhm.
shared that impact the entire SARC membership. Whether you're talking about climate change, air pollution, public health threats. If you could have had SARC come together during the pandemic and have all of the members talk about how they could work together to share resources vis-a-vis the pandemic, that would have been a boon. And quite frankly, I don't see why India and Pakistan would have anything to disagree on when it comes to the idea of working together to combat the pandemic. But as you know, that relationship is just a very difficult one, and it's hard for them to agree. So no, I think SARC is dead in the water. I think that we're seeing other regional organizations become more prominent. Maybe they're more sub-regional than regional. I mean, one that comes to
Right.
mind is BIMSTEC. I mean, we've seen some
Mhm.
pretty meaningful momentum with BIMSTEC, particularly this electricity sharing initiative involving Bangladesh and Nepal and India under the BIMSTEC rubric. That's important. So unfortunately, as much as it would be nice to see SARC succeed and be effective, I think that what's more likely is this continuing process of sub-regionalization, where BIMSTEC
Mhm.
and organizations like that comprise some of the SARC membership, but not all of it, that they become more prominent and impactful.
Uh, and in this region, you see that Bangladesh has been facing a lot of problems because of the Rohingya crisis and the crisis in Myanmar. The objective of Bangladesh to connect the ASEAN has not been successful because of Myanmar crisis. Uh, do you think that this Professor Yunus's interim government uh, will have a change in terms of Rohingya crisis, Rohingya policy?
Right. I mean, I've talked to you about this
Hmm.
in previous interviews. I think that there's going to be a more robust push from this new government in Bangladesh to try to not only bring attention to the plight of the Rohingya and to the crisis and how serious it is, but to make a push for relocations to third countries. I think that this interim government would conclude that it does not make sense at this point to try to negotiate for the repatriation of Rohingyas back to Myanmar, given how the conflict is intensifying and given that you have fresh surges of Rohingya refugees coming into Bangladesh just in recent months. But as you know, this is a very sensitive issue, not just in Bangladesh, but worldwide. And the idea of immigration and refugees, it's a very sensitive political issue, including in the West, including in Europe and the United States. The reality is, unfortunately, there's relatively few countries other than Bangladesh that have been willing to take in significant numbers of Rohingya, and yet you have these very tragic cases of Rohingya fleeing Bangladesh because of the poor conditions there, trying to go to Southeast Asia. In some cases, they've died on the way there. So it's very tragic. But I think that Dr. Yunus, because of his prominence, because of his, for lack of a better phrase, celebrity status, I think that he may be encouraged to leverage that status and his prominence to try to get other countries to be more receptive to this crisis and be willing to help out, not just in terms of providing financial resources and other assistance to Rohingya in Bangladesh, but also to try to agree to take some in. Again, it's a very dicey, sensitive political matter, especially in this year of elections, seemingly in countries around the world. But I do think that if there's going to a change, it's going to be that a stepped up effort on the part of this interim government to get more global attention on the crisis at a moment when there are humanitarian crises seemingly everywhere, but also to try to encourage more countries to take in Rohingya refugees as well.
Michael, the last question for you is, so there's a lot of change, reform initiatives, and also, there's, you said that geostrategically it's not the right time for Bangladesh to decide something new. So what would be your suggestion how the interim government can have a very balanced relationship and overcome the challenges that it has, or can complete the reform agenda? What's your
Yes.
suggestion?
So yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, this interim government has a very difficult job on its hands. I mean, there are massive challenges at play, and the reforms process will not be easy, right? I mean, it's very clear that there are vested interests in many places in the bureaucracy and in the political sphere and elsewhere, that and the business community perhaps that might resist to some extent these reforms, even though there's clearly very strong levels of support for it across the board among the public, within the government, the business community, and so on. So I think that here, all I would advise is yes, push forward with it as much as possible. Try to make as much progress as you can, but at the same time, don't forget about the fact that restoring democracy, is clearly a major goal for this interim government. And the longer things go, particularly if the reforms process sort of lags a bit, if the economy continues to sputter, if you have these outcomes that arise over a period of a year, let's say, I think that the risk there is that the public will grow impatient with the interim government
Mhm.
and demand elections happen soon. So I think that this interim government can't lose sight of the fact that it is an interim government, and it has given no specific time frame for when it intends to have elections, which is okay. It's understandable. They want to see how things go on the reforms process first. But I think it's important to recognize that there's something to be said for getting the process started, seeing some meaningful progress, and then focusing on elections and hoping that the reforms process can be continued post-election down the road, because ultimately it's important for the government to have a public mandate from the people. This interim government, I think, is, generally speaking, has the support of the country. It's being given the benefit of the doubt, but it's not an elected government at the end of the day. And then to the other issue of balancing relationships and all that, here I think Bangladesh is in a good place. It generally speaking does not have any problematic relationships. The relationship with India has become a tricky one, but other than that, I think that it's generally in a good place. I mean, it's not going to lose friends. I mean, clearly the West is behind it, and its regional partners continue to be with it. China continues to be with it. So I don't think it's going to have that many problems maintaining its relationships. But I think that one thing that would be important in this regard is to ensure that law and order is restored, that there is a degree of stabilization in the country, because obviously if there's not, if there are indications that the security situation is getting worse, that stability is not being restored, that could make countries that invest in Bangladesh, that trade with it, or that want to trade, that want to invest, it could make them nervous. And that's not what Bangladesh wants, particularly at a moment when its economy continues to be in a precarious place.
Michael, thank you very much, and I hope that your analysis and comments will help understand better our relationship with US as well as with the other countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Viewers, thank you very much for being with us. We'll come back to you with some new guest anytime soon.